Hi everyone! If you've been following this channel, you probably know that I'm a big fan of making coaster and park recreations in RollerCoaster Tycoon. I've been asked a lot recently about what creation I will do next. I don't actually have any plans to do any in the future, but when making my own park, I definitely learned a lot, and it might be more helpful to share that information with you. There are a ton of techniques and processes that apply to making recreations specifically, and maybe I can help inspire someone else to finally get started on their own dream recreation. Before we begin, I'd like to thank my friend Jazzanden. He recently finished a big recreation of Bonbon Land in Denmark and made some videos of his own describing the process. He was generous enough to write some tips of his own and share them with me for this video. So go check out that Bonbon Land park if you haven't seen it yet. There's a link in this video's description. First of all, which park or location are you hoping to recreate? Maybe you have something in mind already. If not, here are some things to consider when deciding which park to build. First, start small. Take it from me, mega parks aren't really all that fun to build when you're making a recreation. The time and effort required grows exponentially with the amount of land needed. It might sound fun at first to try to make all of Disney World in RollerCoaster Tycoon, but you're gonna get discouraged after a week once you realize just how much there is to do and how long it will be before you're even close to done. Burnout is real, and it's going to happen if you're not careful. Instead, think about something a bit smaller. I'm not saying you should start with a family picnic park, but definitely temper your expectations. There are plenty of mid-sized parks around the world that have interesting layouts or unique attractions. I can't offer you specific suggestions here, that's going to be up to your personal preference. Next, consider the overall layout shape. When playing a grid-based game like RollerCoaster Tycoon or Parkitect, you are limited in the directions that you can build things. Curved and diagonal paths and ride layouts can be problematic when trying to shove them into the game's grid-based design. So when scouting for a park to choose, take a look at the park's overall shape and the layouts of its paths. There's probably a major road nearby you can use as the baseline for adapting the real-life layout to RCT. So are the paths generally orthogonal compared to that road? Here are some examples to show you what I mean. A park like Knott's Berry Farm, built in the middle of a city, is locked to a well-defined grid. So it should be comparatively easy to figure out in RCT. But if the paths are more curvy or going in a mess of different directions, we are going to run into problems. For example, Vienna Prater has a lot of curvy paths that intersect each other, and it's going to take a lot of creativity to come up with a version of this that fits on the grid. In another vein, King's Dominion has straight midways, but a good number of them are built on a diagonal compared to the entrance. Maybe we can find ways of working around this, but it'll be a real challenge. However, in general, the larger and more spread out a park's layout is, the easier it will be to tweak the layout into a grid system. In fact, we can see this in Jazzanden's version of Bonbon Land. There's a lot of green space around the park and its paths, so he was able to adjust the layout to the grid pretty effectively. Now that you've selected a park, it's time to open a fresh sandbox and get to work, right? Not so fast. I know it's tempting, but we still have some work to do first. So let's talk about some prerequisites for making a recreation. Nobody makes a recreation of anything from memory, at least not without expecting to succeed. You'll need to research your park in order to plan ahead. It's vital to have lots of resources at hand to show you what goes where. Obviously, aerial maps and photography are going to be your best friend, as they'll give you a good look at the park from a similar viewpoint to how you'll be seeing it in the game. Services like Google Maps are going to be invaluable, especially if they have 3D models available. Also check out RCDB for roller coaster specific notes and photos. YouTube might also have park walkthroughs for some more up-close details that Google Maps won't have. And if you're lucky, maybe your park has a fan site or two that has a nice collection of more detailed photographs, like CP Insiders is for Cedar Point. Of course, nothing beats going to the park yourself and getting first-hand experience, if it's possible. Nobody's taking videos of maintenance areas, transfer tracks, and backlots for YouTube, so it might be up to you to get those resources for yourself if existing aerial photos don't do the trick. You'll be able to get a much better look at all the little details that might not be apparent in photos you find online. You should also consider making an inventory of each ride and building in the park that you plan on making. This is especially important if your park is going to be big. For Cedar Point, I first made a list of the 80 plus rides and attractions I knew I needed to build. I then grouped them by area so that I could plan those areas accordingly, knowing that I had accounted for everything and would leave myself enough space later on. This goes for buildings as much as it does for rides, and is something I wish I'd done better in my own park. Finding out what the different buildings are in real life will make it a lot easier to piece together areas that don't have as many rides. Okay, so now are we ready to build? Well, sort of. I like to spend some time practicing first, building some of the more complex coaster layouts on their own in an empty park. This is really important for getting an idea of the size and shape that these layouts are going to wind up being in the game. It would be a huge problem if you built most of the park and only near the end it turned out you didn't have the required space to put some of the coasters. So we want to find and solve as many of these layout problems early before we actually piece everything together. Since coasters can have the most complex space requirements, it's important to focus on them up front. Also, pay special attention to small coasters. It's tough to make really small coasters in RollerCoaster Tycoon due to clearance requirements and the sizes of turns. You might wind up needing more space for these than you might originally think. Okay, now we can open up a fresh file and get building for real. When I built my Cedar Point park, the first stage of the process was creating the park layout as a whole while actually building as little as possible. This was to ensure that I had room to put in everything I needed without adding too much detail yet. This made it easy to tweak the map and rearrange things without having to redo a lot of work. You'll need a place to start. It's tempting to put down the main entrance first, and that might work best for you, but consider finding a landmark close to the middle of the park and putting that in place first. That will reduce the chances of things not lining up with each other as you get farther away from your starting point. As I mentioned earlier, the coasters are probably going to be the most important landmarks in your recreation. This is why I built them fully, while only adding placeholders for the remaining rides and buildings. However, if I were to go back and redo it, I might put a bit more thought into the buildings up front. Initially, I just painted the ground with red grid texture to indicate where the buildings were likely to go, without putting a ton of thought into it. This became problematic later on for denser areas like Frontier Town, where there are a lot of small shops crammed together. I didn't initially plan locations for each of the individual storefronts, and wound up not giving myself enough room for all of them. So there are a few shops actually missing. It's not the end of the world, but it would have been nice to think a little more about what each building actually represents, and ensuring that the most important ones are built, and that there is enough room to detail them appropriately. Another thing I talked about a lot in the Cedar Point series is finding the line between realism and aesthetics in RollerCoaster Tycoon. You need to think about your overall personal goal for the park recreation. Does everything need to look exactly 100% the same as it does in real life? Or are you willing to change some things for the sake of looking prettier in the game? That's a personal decision only you can make, but there are a few things I think are important to consider. First, ride scale. We all know that RollerCoaster Tycoon tells us how tall our coasters are, but in my opinion, the scale of the sprites in the game doesn't line up with reality very well. Generally, you'll want to make your coasters smaller in the game than they would be in real life, often a lot smaller. My Magnum, a 200 foot tall coaster in real life, only has a 170 foot drop in the game. The other rides follow a similar ratio, where they're from about 2/3 to 3/4 the size of their real life counterparts. Scaling them down makes the coasters look better and also run a bit more realistically as well. Scenery is also crucial to making a good looking park recreation. Rides are important, but the surrounding details go a long way to enhancing the realism of your park. As mentioned earlier, you can't forget about things like maintenance areas, catwalk, transfer tracks, queue textures, fencing, station buildings, and so on. Speaking of station buildings, making nice buildings is still one of the hardest things to do when it comes to creative RCT, for me at least. Fortunately, there are a lot of good options for making very detailed buildings, and if you decide to incorporate any custom scenery, those options become limitless. It's just a matter of finding the right ones that look enough like the buildings you want to create. Unfortunately, that can get really overwhelming. One recommendation for relieving yourself of some of that mental burden is to take inspiration from other RCT parks. All art is built on the influence of other people's work, and RCT is no different. When I build anything, park recreation or otherwise, I spend a lot of time looking at other parks and picking out things those players built that I like. It's often the case that I'll find a building someone made that looks enough like what I want to make in my recreation, and I'll use it as a jumping off point for my own work. It saves a lot of time and headache trying to come up with unique designs for every building. If you don't already have some personal favorite parks, I recommend browsing New Element and looking at parks tagged Realism. There's tons of inspiration to be had there. Ultimately, remember that this is a 20-plus-year-old game. There are a lot of limitations, and finding ways around those limitations is part of the puzzle that comes with making any park, recreation or creative. Hopefully, you find it to be a fun puzzle to solve, but you're gonna have to make compromises to end up with a design that looks good. I know I dumped a lot of tips on you just now, but I think the main takeaway here is it all comes down to just planning things out. It's always very tempting to just dive in and build some stuff, and after all, that's the fun part, and I wouldn't blame anyone for doing it. In the end, RollerCoaster Tycoon is a game, and having fun is of course the most important thing. But at the same time, if you want to build something you can be really proud of, it takes a certain amount of discipline and attention to detail. But I think it will be worth the effort once it's done. Hopefully, I've inspired you to try making your own park recreations. I'm looking forward to seeing what people come up with. I also hope you found this video helpful. If there's anything you'd like to know more about in the future, let me know in the comments.